Stay away from me, the Billionaire CEO said. Until a citywide power outage left us sharing one bed. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before we step into today's unforgettable journey of two women whose lives are forever changed by an unexpected twist of fate, I would like to ask for one small favor. If you enjoy heartfelt stories filled with emotion, resilience, healing, and love, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. It only takes a second, it is completely free, and your support allows us to continue creating powerful stories that celebrate hope, compassion, and meaningful connections between women. We are truly grateful for every single one of you. And before the story begins, let us know where you are watching from today. Share your city or country in the comments below because we love seeing our community grow from all around the world. Thank you for being here. Now, let us return to our heroine and the extraordinary moment that quietly transformed the course of her life forever. The people who tell you to stay away are often the ones who are the most afraid of being abandoned. When I accepted the position at Harper Global Holdings, everyone congratulated me as if I had won the lottery. The company was one of the fastest-growing corporations in the country. Its headquarters dominated the skyline of downtown Chicago, and its billionaire CEO, Evelyn Harper, appeared on magazine covers almost as often as movie stars. People admired her brilliance, respected her discipline, and feared her reputation. I was 28 years old, carrying nothing but years of determination, a graduate degree, and a promise I had made to my late mother that no matter how difficult life became, I would never stop believing that kindness was a strength instead of a weakness. Walking through the revolving glass doors on my first morning felt like stepping into another world. Everything gleamed, from the polished marble floors to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Employees moved with remarkable efficiency, speaking quietly as though every conversation might somehow echo into the executive offices. My orientation barely lasted 30 minutes before my manager leaned closer and lowered her voice. "One piece of advice," she whispered. "If you ever cross paths with Ms. Harper, keep it professional, keep it brief, and whatever you do, don't give her a reason to remember your name." Around the conference table, several co-workers exchanged uneasy smiles. One of them laughed softly before adding, "Actually, the safest thing is to stay out of her way completely." Another nodded. "People last longer here if she never notices them." I thought they were exaggerating. Every large company seemed to invent myths about its executives. Some bosses were impossible to please. Others were simply misunderstood. I had no reason to believe Evelyn Harper was any different. Then I saw her for the first time. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, just as I was delivering documents for my department. A woman in a perfectly tailored navy suit stepped inside without saying a word. Her posture was effortless, her expression unreadable, and her blue eyes carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions worth millions of dollars before breakfast. The air itself seemed to change. Every employee standing nearby straightened instinctively. No one spoke. No one even checked their phone. She acknowledged no one, yet somehow noticed everything. As the elevator descended, I accidentally shifted the folder in my hands, and a single page slipped onto the polished floor. I bent down immediately, embarrassed, but before I could pick it up, she looked directly at me. Her voice was calm, low, and impossibly clear. "If you want a future here," she said, "stay away from me." The doors opened before I could answer. She walked away without looking back, leaving me frozen beside the elevator while everyone else pretended they had heard nothing at all. I stared after her, confused more than offended. I had spoken exactly 0 words to the most powerful woman in the building, yet somehow she had already decided I should keep my distance. At that moment I believed she was simply the coldest person I had ever met. I had no way of knowing that those 5 words would become the beginning of the most unexpected chapter of both our lives. I told myself that Evelyn Harper had probably already forgotten I existed, but the strange thing was that she seemed to notice me everywhere after that morning. During my first week, I saw her in conference rooms, executive hallways, and once through the glass wall of the boardroom where she stood confidently presenting quarterly projections while every director listened without interrupting. She never smiled, yet she commanded every room without raising her voice. Whenever she walked through the office, conversation stopped naturally, not because anyone was ordered to be silent, but because her presence demanded attention. I focused on my work, determined to prove that I belonged there. I arrived before 8 every morning, organized reports, reviewed financial summaries, and volunteered for assignments that more experienced employees preferred to avoid. Hard work had always been my safest strategy. Still, I could not ignore the uneasy feeling that someone was quietly watching me. One afternoon my department was preparing materials for a client presentation worth several $1,000,000. My manager trusted me with updating a market analysis that would be reviewed by senior leadership before being presented to the executive team. I checked every number twice, but just before the meeting began, I realized one chart contained outdated data from the previous quarter. My heart dropped. It was not a catastrophic mistake, but it was enough to embarrass the department if discovered during the presentation. I hurried toward the conference room with the corrected file, hoping to replace the document before anyone noticed. The doors opened just as I reached them. Evelyn was already seated at the head of the long table, surrounded by executives whose combined experience probably exceeded my age. I quietly handed the revised report to my manager, praying no one would ask questions. Unfortunately, Evelyn noticed the exchange immediately. She looked at the two versions for only a few seconds before lifting her eyes toward me. The room became perfectly still. I expected public criticism or perhaps a meeting with human resources. Before the day ended, instead, she calmly closed the outdated report and opened the corrected one. "Everyone makes mistakes," she said evenly. "The important part is recognizing them before they become someone else's problem." Then she continued the meeting as though nothing unusual had happened. Several executives glanced at one another with visible surprise. My manager looked almost confused. Afterward, a coworker hurried over to my desk. "Do you realize how lucky you are?" he whispered. "Someone in accounting submitted incorrect figures last year." She spent 20 minutes explaining why details matter. Nobody has ever received a second chance that quietly. I laughed nervously, assuming he was exaggerating again, but over the following days similar moments kept happening. During another meeting, Evelyn asked for my opinion on a customer report, even though employees at my level rarely spoke in executive discussions. When I accidentally left my notebook in a conference room, it was returned to my desk with a simple note that read, "Be more careful." There was no signature, but everyone knew whose handwriting it was. The contradictions became impossible to ignore. The woman who had warned me to stay away seemed to be the same woman who noticed every small success, every small mistake, and every opportunity for me to improve. I could not decide whether she disliked me, respected me, or simply considered me another responsibility she refused to neglect. Whatever the answer was, one thing had become clear. Evelyn Harper remembered my name, and for reasons I could not begin to understand, that frightened everyone around me far more than it frightened me. People often believe that wealth protects a person from loneliness, but some of the loneliest rooms in the world are the ones with the best views. By the end of my second month at Harper Global Holdings, I had stopped trying to understand Evelyn Harper. Every time I thought I had figured her out, she did something that completely challenged my assumptions. She remained distant with everyone, never joined office celebrations, never lingered after meetings, and never accepted invitations to company dinners. Yet she somehow knew the names of interns, remembered birthdays listed only in employee records, and quietly approved emergency leave requests without forcing people to explain painful family situations in front of others. The rumors painted her as cold, but the facts never seemed to match the stories. One Friday evening I stayed late to finish a market forecast that needed to be delivered before Monday morning. Around 8:30, most of the lights on our floor had already switched to energy-saving mode, and nearly everyone had gone home. The silence inside the building felt completely different from the busy atmosphere during the day. As I carried the completed report toward the executive assistant's office, I noticed a light still glowing beneath the frosted glass of the private executive hallway. Curious, I slowed my pace. The assistant's desk was empty. Beyond it, through the slightly open office door, I caught a brief glimpse of Evelyn sitting alone behind her enormous desk. There were no board members, no attorneys, no advisors, and no stack of presentation screens surrounding her. She was simply sitting there with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, looking out at the city lights stretching across the Chicago skyline. For several quiet seconds she did not move at all. She looked less like one of the most powerful business leaders in America, and more like someone who had forgotten there was an entire world outside the window. I quickly looked away, embarrassed that I had witnessed such a private moment, and placed the report on the assistant's desk before leaving. As I reached the elevator, I realized I had forgotten my employee badge upstairs. Letting out a quiet sigh, I walked back to retrieve it. This time the executive office door was closed, but I heard a gentle voice speaking inside. I assumed someone had joined her until I realized she was talking on the phone. "I understand," she said softly. "No, do not worry about me. I will stay here tonight." There was a long pause before she answered again. "The apartment is still just an apartment. It does not become a home because it is expensive." Those words settled heavily in my mind. I quietly found my badge and slipped away before she could notice me. Driving home that night, I could not stop thinking about what I had heard. The woman everyone envied owned one of the most luxurious penthouses in the city, yet she preferred sleeping in her office. On Monday morning, nothing appeared different. Evelyn walked through headquarters with the same calm expression, the same perfect posture, and the same quiet authority. No one would ever guess what I had accidentally learned. As she passed my desk on her way to a board meeting, our eyes met for only a second. For the first time, I did not see an untouchable billionaire. I saw someone carrying an invisible weight that no amount of success seemed able to lift, and although I still knew almost nothing about her, I found myself wondering whether the walls she built around her heart had become so high that even she no longer remembered how to find the way out. The night everything changed began like any other busy Thursday, with deadlines stacked higher than coffee cups and every department racing to finish quarterly reports before the end of the week. Around 5 o'clock, the sky outside the office windows turned an unusual shade of charcoal gray, and heavy clouds rolled across the Chicago skyline faster than anyone expected. A few coworkers joked about an approaching summer storm, while others hurried to leave before traffic became impossible. I stayed behind to finish revisions on a client proposal that Evelyn had personally requested for the next morning's executive review. By 6:30, almost every desk on my floor was empty. The quiet hum of computers and distant elevators filled the building, while rain began tapping steadily against the glass. I emailed the completed report, stretched my shoulders, and finally decided it was time to head home. As I stepped into the hallway, every light in the building suddenly flickered once. Then everything went dark. The enormous headquarters disappeared into complete silence. A few emergency lights switched on several seconds later, casting long shadows across the corridors. Somewhere in the distance I heard surprised voices, followed by the sharp sound of an elevator alarm. My phone immediately lit up with emergency notifications reporting a massive power failure affecting large sections of the city. Cell service became unreliable almost instantly as thousands of people attempted to contact family members at the same time. I tried calling a rideshare, but every request failed. The subway system had suspended service, traffic signals across downtown were offline, and local news reported widespread outages with no estimated restoration time. Security personnel calmly directed remaining employees toward the lobby, explaining that many streets were already gridlocked. As I reached the main entrance, sheets of rain were falling so heavily that the buildings across the street were barely visible. The sidewalks were crowded with people searching for transportation that simply did not exist. Just as I considered walking several miles through the storm, someone called my name. I turned to find Evelyn's executive assistant approaching with a flashlight. She looked relieved to see me. "Miss Harper would like to speak with you," she said. Confused, I followed her back through the dimly lit lobby to a private conference room where emergency battery lights provided just enough illumination to see. Evelyn stood beside the window, watching the motionless traffic below. She turned as I entered. "Your apartment is on the north side, correct?" she asked. I nodded. "You are not getting there tonight." I tried to explain that I would figure something out, but she gently interrupted. "The city is effectively shut down for now. Hotels within walking distance are already full, and emergency services have advised people to remain indoors whenever possible." She paused before continuing in the same calm voice that always seemed impossible to argue with. "The residential floor of this building has backup generators. They are limited, but they are functioning. You can stay there until conditions improve." I hesitated, remembering the very first word she had ever spoken to me. "Stay away from me." The irony was almost impossible to ignore. She seemed to notice my uncertainty because a faint expression crossed her face, somewhere between amusement and resignation. "Believe me," she said quietly, "this was not how I imagined spending my evening either." Outside, another wave of rain crashed against the windows while the city remained swallowed by darkness, and without realizing it, both of our carefully ordered lives had already begun drifting toward a future neither of us could have predicted. The executive residential floor occupied the top level of the building, far above the silent streets where thousands of people were still trying to find their way home. The backup generator powered only essential lights, a few outlets, and limited climate control, leaving most of the hallway wrapped in a soft golden glow instead of the bright elegance the building normally displayed. Evelyn walked several steps ahead of me, carrying a flashlight even though she clearly knew every corner by memory. There was no trace of the commanding executive everyone feared during business hours. She moved quietly, almost thoughtfully, as if the darkness had erased the invisible distance that usually separated her from everyone else. She unlocked the private residence with a key, instead of the electronic system that had failed with the outage. The apartment was beautiful in the way luxury magazines often described impossible homes, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city now almost completely black except for scattered emergency lights and passing rescue vehicles. Yet despite the expensive furniture, original artwork and breathtaking view, the space felt strangely empty. It looked perfect, but it did not feel lived in. Evelyn noticed me looking around before placing a small lantern on the kitchen island. "The generator is operating below normal capacity," she explained. "Only one bedroom is receiving power for heating tonight. Everything else has been shut down to conserve energy." I nodded politely, assuming she would take the bedroom while I found a couch somewhere in the apartment. Before I could offer, she spoke again. "The sofa is decorative. It is beautiful, but it is remarkably uncomfortable." For the first time since meeting her, I almost smiled. "I have slept in airports before," I replied. "I will survive one uncomfortable night." She folded her arms and looked at me with the same steady expression she used during board meetings. "You are my guest. I will not have you waking up with a sore back because my interior designer cared more about appearance than comfort." I glanced toward the hallway leading to what was clearly the only usable bedroom. "Then I can take the floor." She let out a quiet breath that sounded suspiciously like restrained laughter. "Claire, there is a king-size bed. We are two adults capable of respecting personal space. This does not have to become unnecessarily dramatic." Her practical tone caught me completely off guard. The awkwardness I had imagined seemed to exist only in my own mind. She handed me a neatly folded blanket anyway. "Use this if it makes you feel more comfortable." While I changed into a spare set of athletic clothes she had never worn but still kept with the tags attached, she prepared simple sandwiches by flashlight because the kitchen appliances could not all operate at once. We sat across from each other at the long dining table, eating quietly while rain continued tapping against the windows. Without conference rooms, expensive suits, or dozens of executives surrounding her, Evelyn looked unexpectedly human. She asked whether my family was worried about me. I admitted that my father had moved to Arizona years earlier, and that my mother had passed away before I finished graduate school. She lowered her eyes for a moment before saying softly, "I am sorry." There was nothing rehearsed about those words. They were simple, sincere, and unexpectedly warm. Later, as we settled into opposite sides of the large bed with more than enough space between us, neither of us spoke for several minutes. The city outside remained silent beneath the widespread outage, and for the first time since I had joined Harper Global Holdings, I realized I was no longer lying awake because I feared Evelyn Harper. I was lying awake because I had just discovered that the woman everyone described as unapproachable might simply be someone who had spent far too many years carrying the weight of the world entirely on her own. Sometimes the brightest conversations happen when the lights are gone and there is nothing left to distract two people from the truth. I was certain neither of us would sleep, and judging by the quiet movement beside me, I was right. The rain had softened into a steady rhythm against the windows, and the backup generator hummed faintly somewhere below the apartment. After what felt like an hour of comfortable silence, Evelyn spoke without turning toward me. "Do you ever wonder how people become strangers to themselves?" The question caught me completely off guard. I looked toward the ceiling for a moment before answering honestly. I think it happens one compromise at a time. You get so busy surviving that you forget who you were trying to become. She was quiet again, and I wondered if I had said too much. Then she surprised me. My parents believed excellence was the only acceptable outcome, she said softly. A perfect report card was expected. Winning was expected. Never needing anyone was expected. Her voice remained calm, but every sentence sounded as though it had been carried for years without being spoken aloud. When I was 12, I won a national academic competition. I came home with a trophy almost as tall as I was. My father looked at it for 5 seconds before asking what I planned to win next. She gave a small laugh that carried no happiness. I spent most of my life believing love had to be earned every single day. I listened without interrupting. The woman whose name appeared on magazine covers had once been a little girl hoping someone would simply tell her they were proud of her. Suddenly her relentless drive made perfect sense. Success had never been about money. It had been about chasing approval that never truly arrived. After a long pause, she asked about my mother. I smiled even though the memory still carried its familiar ache. She worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood, I said. We never had much, but she always made our apartment feel like home. She used to leave handwritten notes in my lunch bag. Sometimes they were just one sentence reminding me to be kind, even when other people were not. I laughed quietly. When I graduated from college, I found one of those notes. Tucked inside an old notebook. It said, "The world already has enough successful people. Try to become a good one." Evelyn did not answer immediately. Finally she whispered, "She sounds extraordinary." I nodded. She was. The room became quiet once more, but it no longer felt awkward. It felt peaceful, as though 2 completely different lives had somehow reached the same place after traveling very different roads. We spoke about favorite books, childhood dreams, and the places we still hope to visit someday. I learned that Evelyn loved small coastal towns because no one recognized her there. She learned that I collected old postcards from cities I had never seen because they reminded me that there was always another horizon waiting. At one point our conversation faded naturally into silence again. Outside, Chicago remained wrapped in darkness, but inside that softly lit room, something invisible had begun to change. The distance between billionaire and employee no longer seemed important. We were simply 2 women who had spent years pretending to be stronger than we felt, each carrying a different kind of loneliness, while quietly hoping someone might eventually see beyond the carefully constructed versions of ourselves. As I closed my eyes, I realized that genuine trust rarely appears in dramatic moments. More often, it begins with 2 honest stories shared in the quiet hours of a long night when neither person has anything left to prove. Morning arrived quietly, not with the familiar glow of sunrise reflecting off glass towers, but with the muted gray light of a city still struggling to wake. The power had not yet returned, and from the apartment windows we could see long lines of traffic barely moving below. Emergency vehicles continued weaving through intersections where traffic lights remained dark. Evelyn was already dressed in a simple charcoal sweater instead of the perfectly tailored suits she usually wore, and somehow that small difference made her seem more approachable than ever before. She handed me a cup of freshly brewed coffee made with the limited power the backup generator still provided. "Thank you," I said, accepting it with a smile. "For everything." She nodded once. "You would have done the same for someone else." Before I could answer, her phone finally connected to the cellular network. Within seconds it began vibrating continuously with missed calls, urgent messages, and emergency meeting requests. The calm atmosphere disappeared almost instantly. Her expression shifted back into the composed leadership I recognized from the office. "The board is assembling remotely," she said after reading several messages. "There has been significant financial disruption across multiple divisions." Less than an hour later, limited electricity returned to the headquarters, allowing essential operations to resume. Employees slowly filtered back into the building, exhausted but determined to restore normal business activity. I returned to my department expecting an ordinary day after an extraordinary night, but the atmosphere felt unusually tense. Groups of employees whispered behind partially closed office doors. My manager avoided eye contact. Shortly before noon, an unexpected company-wide meeting was announced. Everyone gathered inside the largest conference room while several board members joined through unstable video connections. One director spoke first, emphasizing financial losses caused by the outage. Another questioned why emergency contingency systems had not been expanded sooner. Gradually, the discussion shifted away from solving problems and toward assigning blame. Although no one said it directly at first, every criticism slowly pointed toward Evelyn. I sat quietly near the back of the room, listening as people who had praised her leadership for years suddenly distanced themselves from difficult decisions they had previously supported. One executive even implied that recent infrastructure recommendations had been delayed because of her priorities. My heart sank because I remembered reviewing archived planning documents only weeks earlier. Those upgrades had actually been postponed after the board rejected additional funding, despite Evelyn's repeated recommendations. She had argued in favor of strengthening emergency systems. The board had voted against it. I looked around the room expecting someone with greater authority to correct the record. No one spoke. Evelyn remained completely composed. She neither defended herself nor interrupted anyone. She simply listened, accepting every accusation with remarkable restraint. Something inside me refused to stay silent. Before I could overthink the decision, I stood up. Every head turned toward me. My voice trembled slightly at first, but the facts did not. I explained that I had personally reviewed the strategic planning reports, and that the infrastructure proposal had originated from Evelyn months before. I reminded the room that the board meeting minutes clearly documented the funding decision. This situation deserves honest solutions, I said carefully. It does not deserve convenient memories. Silence filled the conference room. Several directors exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others began searching through digital records on their tablets. Finally, one board member cleared his throat and admitted that the documentation supported my statement. The conversation shifted immediately toward recovery planning instead of personal criticism. When the meeting ended, employees quietly left the room one by one. Evelyn remained seated for several moments before looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. There was no authority in her eyes, no distance, and no carefully controlled professionalism. There was only quiet gratitude mixed with genuine surprise, as though she could not remember the last time someone had chosen to stand beside her simply because it was the right thing to do rather than because she held power over them. That evening, after the emergency meetings had finally ended and most employees had gone home to rebuild their interrupted routines, I remained behind to organize the last of the recovery reports. The building had returned to life, but something between Evelyn and me had quietly shifted in a way neither of us seemed ready to name. As I gathered my things, her assistant approached my desk with a polite smile. "Miss Harper would like to see you before you leave." I followed the familiar hallway toward the executive office, but this time I no longer felt intimidated by the silence surrounding it. Evelyn was standing beside the window, watching the city sparkle again after the blackout. The lights stretched toward the horizon like thousands of tiny reminders that darkness never lasts forever. She did not turn immediately when I entered. "Chicago looks different tonight," she said softly. "People usually notice the lights. After yesterday, I noticed the people who brought them back." I smiled. "Sometimes we only appreciate ordinary things after they disappear." She nodded before finally facing me. There was no conference table between us, no board members, and no carefully rehearsed business agenda. "Why did you speak up today?" she asked. "You could have stayed quiet. No one would have blamed you." I answered without hesitation. "Because it was the truth." She looked down for a moment, almost as if those 4 words carried more weight than she expected. "Most people protect themselves first," she admitted. "Especially when power is involved." I thought about that before replying. My mother used to tell me that character is measured by what we do when staying silent would be easier. Evelyn let out a slow breath. I used to believe that too. The room became quiet again until she spoke with a vulnerability I had never imagined hearing from her. "Do you remember the first thing I ever said to you?" I laughed softly. It would have been difficult to forget. She managed the faintest smile before it disappeared. "I told you to stay away from me because I recognized something dangerous the moment I saw you." I frowned slightly, confused. "Dangerous?" She nodded. "You looked at people instead of positions. You listened instead of performing." You reminded me of the person I used to be before success became a wall instead of a bridge. Her eyes met mine with complete honesty. I have spent years convincing myself that distance is safer. Every meaningful relationship I have ever allowed into my life eventually became another goodbye. Some people wanted my influence. Others wanted my fortune. The few who truly cared moved away, changed, or simply became strangers over time. After enough losses, I convinced myself that loneliness was easier than disappointment. I understood then that her first words had never been about rejecting me. They had been about protecting herself. I stepped a little closer, leaving plenty of respectful space between us. You cannot avoid heartbreak by refusing to let anyone matter, I said gently. All that does is guarantee that you face every victory and every struggle alone. She looked at me for several quiet seconds. There were no dramatic declarations, no promises, and no impossible fairy tale unfolding in that office. There was simply one woman who had finally admitted she was afraid, and another who understood that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to keep trusting anyway. For the first time since we met, Evelyn did not look like the powerful executive the world admired. She looked like someone finally allowing another person to see the real woman behind every carefully constructed wall, and somehow that felt far more extraordinary than anything money could ever buy. The weeks that followed did not transform our lives overnight, and perhaps that was what made everything feel real. There was no dramatic ending where the world suddenly became perfect. Instead, there were ordinary mornings, honest conversations, and small decisions that slowly changed the direction of two lives. Harper Global Holdings recovered from the Citywide outage stronger than before because the company invested in the improvements Evelyn had recommended long before the crisis. Employees noticed another change as well. The executive who had once seemed completely unreachable began walking through the office without the invisible walls everyone had accepted for years. She still expected excellence, but she also asked people how their families were doing, remembered important milestones, and occasionally joined the team for coffee instead of eating alone in her office. Those gestures were small, yet they transformed the atmosphere more than any expensive renovation ever could. As for me, I stopped seeing my position as simply another job. Every project became an opportunity to build the kind of workplace my mother would have admired, one where success and compassion could exist side by side. Evelyn and I continued spending time together outside the office whenever our schedules allowed. Sometimes we visited quiet bookstores where no one recognized her. Other weekends we drove along the shore of Lake Michigan with no destination in mind, talking about everything from childhood memories to the future we each wanted to create. There was never any need to rush what was growing between us because the strongest relationships are built through trust, not speed. One afternoon, several months after the blackout, we returned to the same executive apartment where everything had quietly begun. This time the city outside was filled with sunlight instead of darkness. Evelyn stood beside the window, smiling as she looked across the skyline. "Do you know what I finally realized?" she asked. I shook my head. A home is not defined by expensive furniture or beautiful views. It is defined by the people who make you want to return. I reached for her hand, and she gently held mine. There was nothing uncertain about the moment, only a quiet understanding that both of us had spent years searching for something we could never find through achievement alone. Love had not rescued us from difficult memories, but it had taught us that healing becomes possible when someone chooses to walk beside you instead of asking you to carry every burden alone. Looking back now, I sometimes think about the woman I was on my first day at Harper Global Holdings, standing inside an elevator after hearing 5 unforgettable words that convinced me I should keep my distance forever. If I could speak to that younger version of myself, I would tell her not to judge people by the walls they build because every wall has a story hidden behind it. Some people appear cold only because life has taught them that opening their hearts comes with unimaginable risk. Yet the greatest moments of our lives often begin when someone is willing to look beyond fear and choose kindness anyway. The city lights eventually returned after that unforgettable night, but the brightest change had nothing to do with electricity. It happened inside two hearts that had spent far too long believing they had to face the world alone. And perhaps that is the lesson worth carrying into every new day. Wealth may build remarkable buildings, success may earn admiration, and power may open countless doors, but only empathy, trust, and genuine love can turn an ordinary life into a meaningful one. Sometimes the most extraordinary future begins the moment two people stop protecting themselves from happiness and finally decide to believe that they deserve it.